And Vanessa, you've been following the UN General Assembly and particularly Mr. Zelensky's appearance.
Yes, so the first image is actually taken of the audience when Zelensky was speaking. And funnily enough, since I put this together yesterday, Seymour Hersh has just published a new article in which he describes the half-empty house to listen to Zelensky's speech, which I have to say was very focused on the nuclear threat from Russia. So just take a good look at the number of people in the audience, and then let's have a look at this production by Ukraine TV, which shows Zelensky speaking. So let's roll that, Mike.
Не розгортати цю зброю, не розповсюджувати, не допускати погрози нею, не допускати тренування для того, щоб забезпечити ядерне роззброєння. І це хороша стратегія. Але вона не повинна бути єдиною стратегією.
I mean, I'm laughing because this just demonstrates the sheer pantomime that is surrounding the propaganda on Ukraine. So basically, because Zelensky was talking to a diminished audience, many people actually left the area when he started speaking. The Ukraine TV channels basically edited the clip to show a much bigger audience to another speaker. But the problem is they forgot to remove Zelensky. So Zelensky at 14 seconds in this clip is actually listening to himself speaking. This was discovered by, I think, Double D Geopolitics on Telegram, but a number of people were sharing it. I just find it absolutely insane. But what I also wanted to look at following the UNGA speech by Zelensky, and bear in mind I said his focus was very much on the alleged threat of nuclear warfare, of course, instigated by Russia, not by the West at all. To look at this article that I discovered on CNN of all places, and as you know, I wouldn't normally be showing a CNN article, but this is interesting for one reason. So the title is Opinion, the Myth of the Wonder Weapon, and it's written by an analyst from Chatham House. If we can move to the next slide.
Yeah,
Keir Giles, who works with Russia and Eurasia program of Chatham House, which of course is an international affairs think tank in the UK, I would say heavily connected to intelligence agencies and directly to the government, and influences the government. He is author of Russia's War on Everybody and What It Means for You, and the views expressed in this commentary are his own. But his views are very interesting. So he talks about the mass supply of weapons, like, for example, HIMARS, Patriot air defense, Abrams tanks, cluster munitions, F-16 fighter jets to Kyiv, and then just moving on to the next slide. He then actually, very interestingly, he emphasizes the fact, now bear in mind, he's a contributor to Chatham House. He says the UK in particular has consistently led the drive to give Ukraine what it asked for, as well as disregarding US concerns about what Ukraine can strike with what it is given. This is an extraordinary admission here. He goes on basically, if we move on to the next slide, in this, I thoroughly recommend reading this article because it gives a huge number of pointers as to who is really driving the war in Ukraine. And I would say from this article and from Seymour Hersh's recent article, it's not the US, it's the UK. And I would say that was also prevalent in Syria. If you remember in 2017, Trump was talking about withdrawing from Syria. And suddenly we had the Khan Shaykhun alleged chemical attack, which was produced by the White Helmets, the predominantly MI6 created group embedded with Al-Qaeda and other armed groups. So he goes on to say, Zelensky knows there's a risk that the window of opportunity may eventually start to close on backing from Washington itself, basically because there's a potential change of presidency and political trends are likely to change. We know that Trump is talking about ending the war in Ukraine. Now, again, the emphasis is on the failure to restart European defense industries in earnest, which means searching ever harder and wider around the world for munitions for Ukraine. So he's also advocating an increase in defense, not offense, of course, production. He comes back to the UK. For example, in the UK, eager support is constrained by 30 years of defense cuts that I know UK Column has been talking about for years, that have left the cupboard bare. Critical deficiencies in munition stocks were identified well before 2022. Supplying howitzers to Ukraine necessitated an emergency purchase of replacements from Sweden. And there are strong indications that the UK's tiny donation of 14 Challenger 2 tanks represented a substantial proportion of the number of tanks the British Army still had in working order. Remember, this guy is from Chatham House. He's not an uninformed commentator. He also then comes back to this need for increasing defense production. Most Western leaders have done an exceptionally poor job of explaining to their electorates that that means huge reinvestment in defense, and the industry supporting it is vital and overdue. As the US becomes increasingly focused on China, another clue, the defense of Europe will increasingly rely on those frontline states, which of course includes Poland. We've talked about the possibility that Poland will be pushed into the breach that has been left by the death or the death count of Ukrainian soldiers that understand the threat and are willing to take it seriously. Well, I'm not quite sure how seriously right now. Poland is backing off on arms supply. So it's an interesting reflection, I think, of what actually is really going on. And it does appear that the UK is driving this campaign in Ukraine.
And of course, a lot of it, Vanessa, is sheer desperation because the Ukrainian counter-offensive has failed. There is no doubt about that, with huge losses. And Ukraine's now at the point where it simply doesn't have the wherewithal to continue the battle. And we wait to see what Russia's going to do. But yeah, the West has given up its defense industry and now it's paying the price, if we believe the traditional argument.